What's your you don't see that everyday story? I worked at a high-functioning casino as a cocktail server a few years back. This lady came up to me and asked me if I wanted to see something cool. Me not knowing what to expect says sure, why not? This woman proceeds to pull a purple rag out of her bra and begin to unfold it. I start to hear little chirps coming from the rag. This woman pulled a baby chicken out of her bra in the middle of a casino and let me pet it. She then folded the rag back up, stuffed the baby chicken back in her bra, and told me not to tell anyone. I told everyone. Neutering a dog the other day, he appeared to be a cryptorchid, that is, one normal testicle, and one not descended, retained somewhere in the abdomen. Well, we can still neuter these. In fact, it's even more important to do so, since the retained one can later develop cancer if left behind. So, into the abdomen I went, looking for that retained testicle, which I was expecting to find somewhere between the kidney and inguinal ring. Found a uterus. My wife and I were on the loop around Atlanta in bumper-to-bumper traffic. There was a Dodge dually pulling a flatbed trailer in the lane next to us, and on the other side of him was an S10 Blazer, who apparently wanted to get in behind the truck. As soon as the truck was past the Blazer, he started to change lanes, but when he noticed the trailer, he swerved back into his own lane. But he overcorrected. He got that Blazer up on two wheels like in a stunt show. I could see the drive shaft spinning. He held it long enough for me to turn to my wife, tap her on the arm, and say, "Look at that." She saw it. He set it back down, and just kept driving. I was like, are we in a movie? Preface: I live in the meth valley of the Midwest, so this isn't surprising. I was in Walmart and I saw this older woman, tilde 65 years old, and she didn't have a shirt or a bra on. Instead, she took her very stretchy pants and lifted them up above her very saggy breasts, forming a sort of a romper, and just went on her way. That's not something I expected or wanted to see. This was probably someone else's. You don't see that every day, but this one day was the hottest recorded in the city. I was walking down a secluded trail but had to stop at a bench just to cool down. Then this really tall black guy was sitting in a motorized chair with a footcast. He was really chill since he was smoking a joint and asked if I wanted a lift, so I sat on one of the armrests and away we go. It was a short ride, but he gave me a hit of his joint and figured, shit, why not? This has to be the most bizarre situation I've ever been in. We passed an old lady, then it hit me, like we're in the most affluent part of the city and a black and brown guy are cruising through the scenic path smoking a joint on a motorized chair. Just your average day in the city or something. I once took the Channel from London to Paris, first time ever doing so, or even being in France for that matter. As I was walking through the station, a dude ran up to me and started quacking like a duck. I still wonder how that dude is doing 2 years later. Rail riding up in a fairly isolated part of north-central Washington state when 3 emus ran out of the trees. Horses were not impressed. Those birds lived up there for several years, menacing anyone who came around. Watched a guy on a quad drop his hat, look back and decide to leave it behind. About 2 minutes later, some guy in a tan car drives up, swerves around it, stops, leans out of the car, picks up the hat, puts it on and then just drives away like nothing happened. My very first day in New York City, I arrived at Newark and was getting a combination of bus, train to Penn Station. A family came running behind us towards the platform, a crazed redhead screaming. A voice behind her yelled, "Minty, Minty, you don't know where you're going." Then another voice yelled, "Where's Minty going?" And Minty finally replied, "There's only one train." During the bus ride portion of the journey, I saw police clearing up a crime scene of what looked like a mob hit. Chalk outlines, bullet casings, body bags, crime scene tape, although I am led to believe this can be seen every day. Finally, in Times Square, a man approached me, put his hands on my shoulders and asked, "Excuse me, sir, are you Jesus Christ? What a city, eh?" A kid, looked no older than 8, on a mini motorcycle cut off my SUV. Then he parked in the middle of the school courtyard. We noticed he had a girl on the back who looked even younger and did not have a helmet. They jumped off and ran away. The bike was there unattended, still running, and he didn't come when we left almost an hour later, and the thing was still running. Was at a hotel front desk in Dallas on a business trip. Turned around and saw a group of people in mascot costumes and I screamed. Turned out it was a furry convention, which I had to Google as never heard of it before. Then saw one in full costume by the pool sunbathing. Must have been roasting. I work security on the side. I feel like I could give you a different answer every so often. Watched a guy the other day going through boxes of men's shoes and sniffing them, looking for ones with the foot scent. When he found them, he'd get a little fidgety. Went to the back of the department with a few boxes and was looking around heavily, but there was a family and a bunch of kids around, and he left abruptly. No joke, the way he was acting and how he was positioning things. He was about to fuck a pair of Nikes. It was some odd shit. Watched a guy bust out of the store one time with about $1,300 in clothes and right into the side of his getaway vehicle, which then ran him the fuck over. Not ashamed to say I laughed my ass off. He lived. People shitting, pissing, masturbating, domestic violence, robberies, marriage proposal from a cracked out junkie, accidents. I've seen some shit. My family and I were coming back from church. We on the freeway heading home. My sister was driving, and my dad was in the passenger seat. My dad had his hand outside of the window while grabbing the rooftop. Out of nowhere we hear that our dad was disgusted by something. He brings his hand back in the car and sees that a bird had covered the top part of his hand with poop. Everyone started laughing and amazed at what had just occurred. It was a one-in-a-million situation. The bird had to land the poop on my dad's hand while the car was going full speed on the freeway. I was driving home one day, and as I entered my neighborhood, I saw a turkey in mid-flight, about 15 feet in the air, glide across the road and face first into the side of a house. It plopped down on the ground and just as quickly hightailed it around the corner and out of sight. My family was on vacation in San Diego. One day we decided to go to the San Diego Zoo. While we were there we stopped at the polar bear exhibit. We got to watch as a duck landed in the enclosure and got eaten by a bear. Someone on a tour bus recorded this video. It is very normal in other countries, but not where I live. I saw a person of color in a bus one day. It was the only time I saw a black person in my country, and I live in the biggest city. Don't get me wrong, it wasn't the first time, but before it was somewhere abroad. I used to work next door to a mini golf course, and the window of our drive-thru looked out over the golf course. One day I'm working the drive-thru and look out the window to see 4 people golfing in full fursuits. In the parking lot of a concert in the 80s, a guy with a big blonde fro stripped down and simulated intercourse with the windshield of his Chevy. Then he dismounted and strutted around like a chicken. Then, more windshield coitus. Then, chicken, windshield, chicken windshield, chicken, ambulance. I was getting on the freeway on my motorcycle and a truck ahead of me drove over a 4x8 sheet of plywood. The wind from the truck sucked the piece of wood up in the air and it came flying at me. The corner of the wood sheet hit my gas tank and the whole piece bounced over my head. Walking down the street in London 2 years ago, a dog appeared out of nowhere and took a giant shit in the middle of the sidewalk half a block in front of us. Immediately after, a man grabbed a frying pan from a pile of trash bags on the side of the street, scooped up the mess, and dumped the whole thing into a paper shopping bag. A few years ago, while visiting family in the south of Spain, I live in the States, I was out at a bar with my cousin. His girlfriend's family owned the bar, and it was small but packed. I went upstairs to the only bathroom to go pee, opened the unlocked door and walked in on a fam threesome in full swing, ass and tits and everything. Immediately tried to cover my eyes while backing out the door and yelling "Lo siento, lo siento." My cousin, his girlfriend, and her mom ran up and promptly removed them, but I had zero desire to touch anything in the bathroom after that. This was also the first night I ever tried absinthe, and skinny dipped in the Mediterranean for the first time. Was a solid night. So let me start by saying last week at work I was watching some convenient cop vids on Reddit. Highly recommend. I call my husband as I leave the office, tell him about the videos and explain how I want a dash cam for some of the wacky stuff I see during my 55-mile commute. I'm about halfway home on Route 78 westbound, 3-lane highway, driving in the middle lane. I see a cloud of dirt kicking up and the median off in the distance. I was a bit confused, trying to make sense of it. Then all of a sudden I see an 18-wheeler driving toward us in the median. Absolutely horrifying. He ends up driving head-on in the fast lane. Somehow we all dodged the truck. I got a brief look at the driver's face, sheer horror. Called 911 and reported the incident. No idea how it ended, but definitely not something you see every day. I bought a dash cam that evening. Doctor, 18-wheeler crossed over median into oncoming traffic. Had a turkey vulture swoop down and kill a squirrel right in front of me, and then not 30 seconds later, a red-tailed hawk came down and killed the turkey vulture. Hawk is going to town for about 5 minutes, when a bobcat that had apparently been watching this shit the whole time sprints out and kills the hawk. I have a farm. I have ducks on one side and pigs on the other. One of my male ducks was awfully rapey of the females, so we put him over with the pet pigs. He could easily leave if he wanted, but he chooses to stay. He can be seen lying on top of his beloved pot-belly friend, nibbling his ear and making sweet love while my poor pot-belly piggy boy just lays on his side in the sun without a care in the world. Edit, A1 award, thank you. I was heading home from my job as a haunted house actor one night when I saw a school bus surrounded by police cars. This was a little after midnight BTW. It was on my same road going the opposite direction, and all the police cars had their lights on. I was so surprised that I forgot to pull over and the police cars and bus honked at me as they shot past. I swear I heard a noise like screaming coming from the bus. I asked around the next day at the haunted house to see if any of the other actors saw the bus when they went home. Nobody else did. To this day, I have no idea what it was. I stepped out the back door of my family's cabin to go for a leak, and 15 feet away from me on the back trail was a young cinnamon-colored black bear. He was just sitting on his ass, eating the fresh dandelions and clover. I was startled, so I yelled at him, and he was so startled he literally fell over and ran away. I kinda felt bad for scaring him, but also not, because we don't need bears lurking around the cabin 24/7. So I was with my family, Mom's boyfriend, brother and sister out in a boat fishing. It was a fairly rough area, near the strait leading out to open ocean, plus it was windy and overcast. The BF hadn't weighted the line enough and so it didn't sink. We saw a seagull dive for bait at the end of the line. It was a good 50 feet away. We saw the line being pulled into the air as he made off with our bait, only to drop it as the line went tight. We decided it was too rough to fish and went back to camp on the islands up there. Okay, I was in a Chinese restaurant in London. It had been fairly busy, but by the end of my meal with my GF, the place had emptied apart from our table and one other, and of course, like many people, the other table hadn't noticed the atmosphere and gone quiet and were speaking quite loudly still. The first thing I heard when we started to speak in a quieter tone was a WSS, one of those days where you are on and off UN helicopters all day. It was said in the sort of tone that you might say you saw a friend in town, just a totally everyday sort of tone, as if it really was mundane and average for them. I suspected at the time they might be journalists, but I wasn't sat in a position to get a good look at them to see if they were TV journalists or not. I was sitting in my work truck across the street from a power station. I was parked looking at my phone, when there was this sudden pressure in the air. Before I had a chance to register anything, there was the loudest crack followed with an explosion of sparks and fire. Blue beams of electricity arched off the transformers and broken cables. I noped out of there as fast as I could and dialed 911 on the way. I was sitting in my work truck across the street from a power station. I was parked looking at my phone, when there was this sudden pressure in the air. Before I had a chance to register anything, there was the loudest crack followed with an explosion of sparks and fire. Blue beams of electricity arched off the transformers and broken cables. I noped out of there as fast as I could and dialed 911 on the way. Some guy cut me off with a trailer on a road with a speed limit of 35. A few minutes later I happened to pull into the same gas station as him. I try my best not look at him. I don't want to start anything. I hear, "Hey," I make a beeline for the gas station door. Then I hear a whistle coming from the direction where he was. Still trying to ignore him, I finally turn around when he comes jogging up to me. Rough-looking fella says, "Sorry for cutting you off back there. I was low on gas. I drive for a living and come across a-holes daily, so this guy apologizing threw me off." I said no worries and thanked him for apologizing, and we went our separate way. TLDR, a-hole driver cuts me off and then apologizes to me in public. On vacation in London, my wife and I were waiting for a train in a tube station. 2 trains arrived at the station before ours showed up. As a native New Yorker, I was comforted to see that pigeons live in subway stations everywhere. The first train pulls into the station and the doors open. As people enter and exit the train, one pigeon flutters down from the ceiling, lands on the platform and calmly walks onto the train like he's off to work or something. My wife and I laugh about this a little as the doors closed and the train pulls away from the station. The second train pulls into the station, the doors open, and people shuffle out. After a moment a different pigeon walks out of this train and then flutters up to spot vacated by the first pigeon. Anyway, seems like London pigeons have the tube pretty much figured out. I was passed out on the couch. I hear yelling, then see lights. I wake up to a cop at my front door open with the rifle pointed at me. When he finally gets me to wake up, he asks, "Is there anyone else here?" I look at him dumbfounded and then rapidly my sister in the other room. He looks where I pointed and looks back at me and then says, "Okay, well, next time lock the store," and walks off to my neighbor where I hear him knock but got no reply and walks away altogether. I just closed my door and made sure to lock it before I went back to sleep. I got into my car the other morning to go get my COVID vaccine. As I was pulling out, I noticed that I was parked next to the license plate that was sequential to my own. For example, I have plate AB 1234, and a plate directly to my left was AB 1233. I stopped, pulled back into my spot, and took a picture. Because what are the odds? ? I was legit almost late for my vaccine just to capture this. Riding SEPTA out of Center City, Philly, New Year's Eve, I watched a wasted college-age dude board the train with a gigantic bottle of champagne and then repeatedly puke into it. Not sure if there was champagne still in it, but the bottle was like 2 feet tall. There must have been like 3 gallons of champagne in that thing.